So welcome to this talk on empathetic machines. My name is Dr. Shauna Cannon, and I'm a researcher based at Crash, and I work on the Giving Voice to Digital Democracies project. And within this, we're really looking at the social and ethical implications of language-related technologies. So today we're thinking about empathy, and specifically computational systems and communication systems that utilize empathy in how they work. So in my previous work, I've kind of worked adjacent to empathy, looking at things like how different forms of media can support narrative engagements, so interactive film, how this can perhaps enable people to establish connections with characters or identify with people who live lives that are different from theirs and who have perspectives that are distinct from their own. And I've also looked at human communication and the ways in which we use language to communicate with each other and understand our different perspectives and attempt to create shared meaning and perhaps moves towards intersubjective understanding, so coming to understand different viewpoints and what that looks like linguistically and interactionally. But in today's talk, we're going to be thinking particularly about conversational agents and chatbots, and what that has to do with empathy, why there is, or if there is a need for empathy in relation to developing systems that communicate with language. And we'll look at some specific examples of current applications and systems that utilize empathy and how and why they do that from a theoretical standpoint, from a practical implementation standpoint, and then try and think through a little bit what this means in terms of what are the implications for how we conceptualize empathy, computational empathy, different forms of thinking about empathy in this arena, and the potential wider implications for us as individual users who engage with these systems and society more broadly. So to start with, what am I referring to when I talk about conversational agents or chatbots? So by this I mean really any system that uses natural language to communicate with a user, and that can be via speech or text. So prototypical examples would be virtual personal assistants that are popularly used on smart speakers and phones, Alexa, Cortana, Google Home. But we also have text-based systems. For example, many websites utilize chatbots in sort of customer service facing roles. But yeah, so it can be text-based, it could be speech-based, but essentially systems that enable the user to directly communicate with the system using natural language that we use in our everyday conversations. And the range of applications and conversational context that these systems are used in is increasing and diversifying. So while the most common uses of say Alexa is still play me a certain song, possibly interact with my smart home to turn off lights, etc. There are many other uses. So most recently, the World Health Organization created a chatbot to discuss for people to find out information about COVID-19, to get access to good quality information, helping sort of myth busting. We have customer service chatbots that try and reproduce some of the more mundane or simple conversations that previously humans would have conducted. And we'll have others moving into other types of conversational contexts. So for example, mental health support. So there are a number of mental health apps available currently, and some of which use chatbots to support users to engage with conversations about their mental health. And for example, Wobot is one that's very popular, and this is a chatbot that uses principles from cognitive behavioral therapy to engage with people to support them towards better mental health. So these are quite complex contexts, and there's been a real move from more constrained, very domain specific and task-based conversations to more emotionally complex contexts and the ability to handle this wide range of conversations. And this has led to a perceived need for agents to be more socially competent. And this has informed a sort of a design agenda to create more human-like conversational agents. And there are also ones that are squarely positioned as emotional companions rather than assistants. So social chatbots or chitter-chatterbots, various names such as Microsoft's Xiaoice or Pandora bots, Mitsuko, they have no other aim. They're not there to help you with a particular health condition or to help you purchase the right insurance. They are purely there to pass time with and to have social conversations with. So chatbots are not something new. In fact, the first chatbot was developed by Joseph Weizenbaum back in the 1960s, and it was called Eliza. So anecdotally, the story goes that Weizenbaum was really sort of skeptical of the idea of humans engaging in meaningful conversations with computers. And so he developed a chatbot named Eliza, which was based on a Rogerian psychotherapist. And this was selected because it enabled a relatively simple program which used open-ended questions and repetitions, so reframing, taking what the user says and then reframing it as a question. Didn't require sophisticated natural language generation, but could sustain a sort of conversation. And yeah, what apparently he found was that people actually responded to the computer program in ways that were more akin to how people react to humans. And you know, he was not necessarily, he did not necessarily want to advocate that, or perhaps even strongly argued that computers should not be allowed to make important decisions because they lack the qualities such as compassion and wisdom which make humans human. But yeah, this was used kind of as a case in point because apparently his secretary asked him to leave the room while they interacted with the chatbot, and he was surprised that such a simple program could create such a response. So this tendency for people to anthropomorphize and respond similarly to agents as they would to other people has since been kind of more widely acknowledged and studied. So that when people are talking in natural language with someone, the ability to behave in ways that really reflect and are very similar to how we would treat a human being start to emerge. And this was talked about in the kind of early 2000s as kind of computers as social actors theory. So it's the idea that people behave as though the computer is a social actor rather than just a computer. Now, many language skills are closely intermingled with essentially human characteristics. And so studies have shown that when we have a system that is talking in a human-like way, this can promote social responses, even when we know it's not a human. And so the idea behind building machines that are able to express empathy is really a desire to further build on this possible tendency and imbue agents with human traits such as empathy to enhance the type of conversations that the systems are capable of engaging in. And, you know, well-known systems are already kind of being designed to respond empathetically, in a sense, to user inputs. And, you know, this is done with the aim of ensuring that the conversational interactions are as naturalistic and as human, or as naturalistic as human interactions in their style and content. So currently, if you tell Alexa, I'm feeling anxious, she responds with, I'm sorry to hear that. While if you ask the same thing to Cortana, it replies with a generic statement. Here is what I found. And then it lists the results from a search engine. So there's clearly the choices in how we decide to integrate these features. And the reply by Alexa creates the illusion that the system understands something of the psychological or emotional state of the user, while Cortana's response kind of doesn't. So from a system designer's perspective, the motivations are relatively straightforward. You want to maximize the tendency to maximize the tendency to anthropomorphize in the hope that it will lead to better engagement. But also for certain contexts, the ability to empathize may be quite intrinsic to that type of interaction being successful. And if we think about particular, if the use of chatbots is to expand into these spaces such as mental health conversations or health conversations more generally, where the need to understand, empathize with another person's perspective is quite crucial to how that conversation moves on and develops. It's seen as an important kind of stepping stone. So designing conversational agents to be perceived as empathetic draws on recognizable patterns from human behavior and social practice. And these patterns enable these systems to be interacted with as if they were human, and yet they are not human. And since the days of Eliza, there have been a number of technical advances, and modern dialogue systems are designed to provide, reasonable responses to any question or statement a human user might generate. And due to the availability of large data sets of human-human conversation, of people talking about a range of topics, of discussing emotional content, it's possible to build more complex systems that can either draw on these existing databases of conversations to retrieve appropriate answers or appropriate responses that most closely match what a user has stated, or to use generative techniques to create bespoke responses that take the information that the user has said and generate one based on patterns learned in previous conversations that have been observed. However, while systems are becoming more adept at using human language, the systems underneath are still not human. They are far less capable at attending to nuanced social cues or interpreting contextual information and the situated context of language. So as humans, we're able to use language very flexibly and adaptively, and we're skilled at picking up on sort of subtle cues and inferring meaning. And this is obviously much more difficult for a chatbot or a conversational agent, but there are advances, and so it's moving. So it's not necessarily a static situation, it's developing kind of as we speak. But we're used to communicating with other people who do recognize emotion or understand when their conversational partner is frustrated or bored or angry or upset or just really confused. And I think the majority of systems that are currently available and commercially used are still not capable of doing that. I think anyone who's interacted with a virtual personal system will probably see that there's still something of a gap between talking to another human and talking with a conversational system. So before we consider conceptually, I guess, whether conversational agents are even capable of empathy, it's necessary to think a little bit about what empathy is. Although it's a commonly used term, and I think everyone in the audience, I would guess, it would be like, oh, empathy, yeah, I feel like I have an idea about what that is. As a term, it's quite problematical, and there are many non-equivalent definitions that are regularly used in various fields. So psychotherapists and sociologists, philosophers, social neuroscientists, developmental psychologists, clinicians, all have kind of different working frameworks for conceptualizing empathy and studying it. But nonetheless, despite the ambiguity of the term itself, it remains an important one in the analysis of human-human interactions. So empathy is broadly acknowledged as the various cognitive, affective, and physiological phenomena associated with the vicarious experiencing of another individual's emotional state or personal condition, and their perspective, really. And there is generally an accepted distinction between cognitive empathy and affective empathy. So cognitive empathy it is really thinking about these perspective taking processes, the ability to conceive of another person's mind as distinct from your own, and consider what their thoughts and how they could be distinct. While affective empathy is really about the affective state, so the ability to observe, imagine, and infer another person's emotions or feelings. And this ability to sort of identify with other people and recognize and respond to emotional content that they are communicating. It's also, more broadly speaking, it's seen as very key to social aspects of and community building. It's something that's seen to develop as well. So in humans, psychologists, developmental psychologists have studied empathy in children and find that it's not innate, but it is learned, and it develops over the course of childhood, starting from the age of, I think studies suggest from the age of 2, children can start to understand the concept of self and other, but younger children still struggle to understand how other people feel when they don't feel the same way as themselves. But yeah, it has strong links to sociality. It can promote pro-social behaviour, it can inhibit aggression, and it provides a sort of foundation for a care-based morality. Evolutionary scientists have looked at this and explained it as a trait that has evolved to support social cohesion and necessary for survival in social groups, previously thought of as kind of exclusively human, but empathetic behaviours have also been observed in animals, but primarily social species of animals, or animals that associate in social groups. So it's very interlinked with sociality. And regardless of the various theoretical stances taken, it's evident that by facilitating the sharing of experiences, needs, desires between individuals, empathy plays a critical interpersonal role in human societies. But it's also worth denoting the differentiation between empathy as an inherent trait or a disposition, and the observable. So, there's work that looks from the neuroscientific perspective and the psychological perspective that tries to understand what being empathetic means, what it means to be empathetic as an individual, and measure an individual's level of empathy relative to others. But then there's also the display of behaviours that enable us to recognise empathy in how people behave, so a more behavioural kind of approach, and this looks at how we interact with other people and how we respond to particular situations, or how we respond to others, and how those particular ways of behaving may create sort of perceivable empathy that is observable by another. And obviously it's quite difficult to measure. Both of these are difficult to measure, but especially the former. But psychologists have traditionally used sort of questionnaires and self-reports where they map questions and items onto some of the fundamental elements that have been identified as being related to empathy, such as perspective taking, and try and use these to ascertain how empathetic an individual is. But there is no standard test that can unequivocally determine how empathetic a person is. And so with the sort of looking at how people behave and how that may indicate empathy, and enable people to start trying to look at how it manifests, but it's still, there are not perfect methods for measuring this. And communication is one site where observable behaviors associated with empathy kind of manifest. And there's kind of a fundamental, as we kind of pointed to in the last one, the fundamental connection between empathy and communication. You know, according to Wittgenstein, without our ability to shape concepts and share these with other people and respond in similar ways, language and communication would be impossible. So, so we understand that, but then what is it to communicate empathetically? And as humans, how do we do that? So we're able to communicate empathetically in a number of different ways. So it can be demonstrating that you are actively listening and engaged in what the other person is saying. So studies have looked at the use of, say, gesture for communicating concepts, especially abstract concepts, to try and create a shared meaning and a shared understanding between yourself and another. Or, you know, the use of continuous for when we're giving feedback, to let someone know that we understand, or we need a bit more information to really fully understand their perspective and where they're coming from. And of course there is the content of the words themselves, and studies of empathy and communication. There have been a number of studies that have particularly looked at, for example, medical context, because this is one area in which empathy has been considered both important and key to good communications. So many medical degrees actually include modules to improve empathetic communication and develop empathetic communication skills. And within studies of this, they've looked at the implicit linguistic cues. So Suckman et al. Talk about potential empathy openers and the particular linguistic constructions that enable a clinician to infer an emotion that might not have been explicitly expressed. And these sort of more linguistic and pragmatics studies of how language is used in practice have started to sort of evaluate how empathy in this particular context of clinical communication kind of works, and what are the different forms of empathetic behavior that are conveyed through communication, and different sort of linguistic items such as verbs of acknowledgement. So I see, I appreciate, etc. So there's a range of different ways that that as humans we use language to communicate and to establish these forms of kind of mutual or shared understanding in ways that relate to empathy and empathizing with another and their situation. And as empathy in humans has garnered much attention, it's not surprising that attempts to computationally model empathy or think about what this could mean for, say, social robotics has also, you know, been an area of interest. But as there are few stable conventions for using the terminology to describe empathy in humans, this instability is likely to be even greater when we extend this discussion to include artificial agents. So Minoru Asada introduced the term artificial empathy, and this was very much informed by neuroscientific and biobehavioral foundations observed in humans, and it sought to kind of replicate the human affective developmental process by means of synthetic approaches. And it emphasized the importance of physical embodiment, and crucially it focuses on the social interactions that enable the development of these empathetic behaviors through interactions with the environment and the people in it. So automated systems that have been programmed or trained to interact socially in a manner that displays the same kinds of empathetic behaviors as humans would constitute artificial empathy. So it's trying to denote that the systems are designed to develop or require something. They would start, in taking the concept of an extreme example would be to replicate the way in which a child learns and develops, starting from nothing to being a competent empathetic communicator, and it would try and sort of replicate that process. But clearly that's quite distinct to what we're talking about in conversational agents, and especially the kind of examples that we've talked about so far. So there's a need to sort of differentiate between artificial empathy, which seems to have a slightly grander ambitions, and simulated or fake empathy, which really is more about mimicking the empathetic language use, despite lacking any inherent empathy or any, the sort of really fundamental concept of empathy that is discussed in relation to artificial empathy. So, it's possible to learn the it's possible to imitate empathy without necessarily being empathetic. And in fact, as humans, we do this. So, we know how to use empathetic sounding communication for a particular effect, for example, through sarcasm. I'm so sorry to hear that. That's kind of, we're playing with it there. And psychopaths are considered capable often of simulating empathetic responses, and may use this to persuade or manipulate others. So not necessarily having inherent empathy or this kind of dispositional empathy does not necessarily mean that you cannot behave in ways that may be perceived as empathetic. So it's useful to kind of carve out these distinctions and use these to help us think through what it means to use the patterns from human language to create perceptions of empathy while not being empathetic at all. Okay, so this pervasive conceptual looseness has made it easy for the responses generated by chatbots to be classified as empathetic in the technical AI literature. And there's a lot. There is, if you were to go on Google Scholar and search papers relating to making an empathetic chatbot, that there is a lot of research in this area, and there are a lot of chatbots that already are described as empathetic. And there is research that looks to measure the empathy of chatbot replies. But caution is needed here because, as we've explained, empathy as a term is relatively, and as a concept is uncertain in human interactions. The methods used to measure and assess empathy when humans are talking to each other, there isn't a clear-cut kind of single way of doing this. There are ways of gathering indicators. So it becomes more nebulous when we start describing human-computer interactions and thinking about whether these constitute empathy and how empathetic they are. So turning to a specific example, Microsoft's Xiaoice is a very popular social chatbot with over, I think, 660 million users that has been, I think, in use for sort of seven years now. And they describe Xiaoice as a social chatbot with empathy, and explain that social chatbots require emotional quotient to meet users' emotional needs, and to create social belonging. And so, okay, we are told that Xiaoice is an empathetic social chatbot, but what does that phrase actually mean in practice? So it means that it has an empathy computing module. So we'll think through what that does. So Essentially, it enables the system to identify the user's emotions from the conversation, to identify and classify emotions, and also to detect how these emotions change over time, and also to understand the user's emotional needs, which definitely resembles ways that we start thinking about it, but obviously it's functioning quite differently. So what this module actually does is it automatically processes a user's statement, and it will uses a number of automated ways of extracting information from the textual message itself. So we can use topic detection to understand what someone is talking about, the intent. You can use sentiment analysis, but this has 5 predetermined labels for sentiment analysis. So happy, sad, angry. It's a relatively constrained way of extracting emotional content and interpreting those emotions. And they can start use opinion detection to see if they're talking about something as positive or negative or neutral. So this is quite different to what we as humans do. It's a simplified version of trying to ascertain some of those key features that are involved in empathetic communication, but it's obviously quite limited. And the interpersonal response generation section then takes that information and enables them to create a response that integrates those aspects of that understanding level, and also integrates the persona of Xiao Weiss itself to make that come through. And so that is how they compute empathy in the case of Xiao Weiss. But obviously the lack of established measures for assessing empathy in dialogue systems makes it quite difficult to validate any of these claims that a given system is empathetic. It's very challenging to do that. And it's an emergent area, so there's kind of there is not a great deal of work looking at how to do this kind of effectively. Or in the case of Xiao Weiss, they use other indicators as a proxy for empathy. So what they look at is the number of conversational turns. So to assess whether this empathetic module that they've created results in an empathetic agent, they use the number of conversational turns per session, so how long a conversation lasts, and the number of active users of the system. So they can see that year on year, as they've integrated these elements, they have got more users. But is that really empathy? So they argue that if a person enjoys its companionship via conversation, we can call the machine empathetic. But this is, this is definitely distinct from the sort of empathy that we were talking about before. So as the authors put it, Xiao Weiss aims to pass a particular form of the Turing test, a socially rather than functionally motivated assessment, where humans and machines coexist in this companion system. And I think, what they do show is that people choose to engage with this system, and it's popular, and they engage in long conversations with it. But it's not clear that such measures can really assess anything resembling the concept of empathy that is recognized as empathy in humans. Measuring how long people talk to the system for, it could potentially indicate enjoyment. It definitely signals engagement, but not necessarily empathy. So yeah, I mean, they in their the study of the interactions with Xiaowai, they show that people are using the system sometimes for extremely long amount of time. So the longest conversation to date is over 29 hours. You know, and this does suggest, and that's in a single session, so one a conversational session, so from when the conversation was open to closed, ran for 29 hours, and featured over 7,000 turns of conversation, which, you know, certainly suggests that users are forming some form of relationship with this chatbot, or are gaining something from the interaction. It's not clear that that is to do with empathy, but it might tell us something about, you know, why interacting with a program that's designed to be friendly, entertaining, always understanding of our perspective, our wants and our opinions, might appeal to people, or might speak to parts of our egos, or might be quite addictive or comforting, or might, you know, provoke different types of relationships that we might not find in our interactions with other humans. It's something that's quite distinct, and, you know, whether that's deeply disturbing or potentially beneficial, I'm leaving aside right now, but there's clearly something in this space, but not necessarily empathy, I would argue. You know, can the experience of interacting with a machine ever be comparable to interactions with another human? I think particularly when we're delving into the sphere of talk that relates to emotions and experiences that machines necessarily cannot have, this is quite complicated. So as empathy, as we've thought about empathy in terms of how it manifests in human interactions, we see that it's difficult to define, it's difficult to measure, but there is something clearly happening in terms of the social relationships that have been developed between humans in societies, and the ways that we communicate our own position, others, and we've become attuned to emotional content as serves various functions in society. But what does it mean when we have those these patterns of behavior enacted by a machine, and in a machine that is not capable of feeling or understanding those depths of experience? So, as all such systems of conversational agents really lack the kind of consciousness, understanding, or intentionality, they're not able to participate in a meaningful way in the states of their users. And while they may be able to recognize using a simplified sentiment analysis kind of approach some emotions, and they might be able to respond by selecting appropriate responses or generating responses that are relatively appropriate, and they may be perceived as empathetic, whether they are truly empathetic on a fundamental level, I would argue not in terms of human empathy. So, you know, there's partly this is about language terminology, definitions. Am I being a pedant? You know, are they distinct concepts? You know, but maybe it is necessary to distinguish between, when we're talking about machines, you know, fake empathy, and this is, or computational empathy, and how we start to create meaning. So I think I've gone on too long, so I'm not going to go. I'm going to cut that bit short. But yes, so I think the fundamental difference for me with empathy compared to other types of computational concepts. So, for example, computational creativity. Creativity is something that was thought of as very exclusively human, but computational creativity is something that can be explained as it's different to human creativity, but it's a thing in and of itself. So can we say the same about computational empathy? Is that sufficient as a term? And for me, I feel that there is a fundamental difference when we're talking about empathy, because it comes back to the sort of relational and interactional aspects of how we relate to other human beings. It's, you know, essentially about intersubjectivity, about the attempts to this mutual and reciprocal process of understanding what it is to be, to feel, and to develop thoughts, opinions, and understand oneself and another. But that's just kind of my take on it, I guess. I think even if they are not capable of empathy as we know it, they can be programmed to use patterns associated with empathy, and this fake empathy may then be perceived as users as more or less empathetic. And this can alter the types of interactions that people are having with these systems and potentially influence users' behaviours. And clearly this has wider implications. So rather than just trying to build the most convincing empathetic chatbot, I think there's quite a lot that we currently don't understand that we would benefit from looking at further. So specifically about how, you know, empathetic communication that is traditionally communicated by a human, when it's communicated by a chatbot, how does this differ? In what ways? You know, are there certain there are studies that are starting to look at this that show that we don't respond the same. You know, although the computers as social actor theory gives a nice idea that things are exactly the same, we respond in exactly the same social cues as we would to a person. That's not actually true. It's more complicated than that. There are certain things that are different. People tend to speak with a much clearer, shorter, concise language when communicating with a machine, for example. So we need to think about what happens when we do introduce these empathetic communication elements into a chatbot. How does that change the relation between the user and the machine? You know, these are things that are traditionally used for social bonds, for establishing trust. And what does it mean to have systems that have this capacity built into it? And what are the implications for individuals and society? And what do designers of these technologies need to be thinking about? So I think the key thing to take away really is that human machine and human machine communication is not equal to or the same as human communication. And this has been, you know, acknowledged by communication scholars, but doesn't necessarily filter down to the work in computer science always. And I think there, you know, it needs to this distinction needs to really be given more attention, and we need to attend to these potential differences and the ways in which when we're thinking about an interaction, we're not just thinking about the language used and the language that is most appropriate based on how humans communicate with other humans, but also thinking about, no, this is a conceptually different interaction paradigm. So there are a number of factors. We as humans adjust how we speak when we're talking to a best friend or our manager at work, for example. You know, we know that the effect of identity has an impact on how we communicate, the ways in which we talk. We need to start bringing the kind of fundamental difference and acknowledging that difference of human machine interaction being distinct to human interaction, and not just modeling it to be exactly the same. So we can't just emulate empathy between humans. We can't expect the same expectations, and we need to test and see what happens, and then start thinking about, and what are the consequences of this. So yeah, I think we need to look at this a bit more, but think about how we can evaluate these differences that emerge, and what is the impact of fake empathy? Is it beneficial? Are there certain contexts where it is absolutely imperative and the conversation will not take place, and is that a necessary conversation to take place? But we need to really dig a little bit deeper to start understanding what elements of empathetic communication users want from their ID. their dialogue systems or their conversational agents, and develop some greater clarity at both the sort of computation, conceptual level and also implementation level, to think about these differences between perceived empathy, fake empathy, and what it means for systems to enact these behaviours. Okay, and I think I'll leave it there so that we have time for questions. Thank you all for attending. As I say, questions, you can either put them in the chat, or if you would like to use the raise your hand function and unmute yourself and actually ask, then I'm very happy for you to do that. I'm going to end slideshow and stop sharing. Okay. Okay. I'm going to just check the chat, so 1 moment. Do I believe that AI could ever experience true empathy? So it's a tricky one. I don't, I guess. I think there is something fundamentally different. There is something specific in the human condition and the way in which we as humans interact with one another and have developed as a society. However, of course, it's impossible to foresee the future, and at some point we might be living in a time where we are all cyborgs, or there is more symbiosis between systems, and I would hate to have absolutely ruled it out, but I think my intuition, I think there are other things that that these systems are capable of. I think the fact that we always want to map terminologies and concepts from our existing relations and patterns and from human interaction is a limitation, and also probably prevents us from seeing other ways that people could interact, or other types of functions that they could perform. So for me, I guess I think true empathy is something that is fundamentally human and is about the human experience. But I think you could probably make some very interesting systems that are kind of navigating in this space. But for me, I would probably draw that line there. Any other questions? Oh, okay, got another one. Okay, so this question I'll read out loud rather than, although people can probably see it, but in case not. So it's asking about this kind of these innate traits that are arguably fundamentally human, but we have no clear concepts to help us define these concepts. These traits lack clear, necessary and sufficient conditions to pick up what's truly empathetic or creative. So how would we know whether machines would or could be empathetic if we can't even clearly know that about ourselves as humans? I'm curious what ideas about this. Great question. And I think that's kind of, there's two different hats here to wear. So in terms of sort of doing research, the inclination is to try, is to try and find rubrics or try and find ways of approaching these topics that give you a hook in to see. So for example, in the case of empathy, I guess for me, what I think the most interesting studies that provide the most insights about empathy, and I mean, arguably, perhaps that phrase itself isn't that useful, and you need to get more specific and drill down to particular kind of components. If you start breaking it down and you look at how we communicate with each other, the ways in which we cooperate, and you look at, say, language data, linguistic data of conversations, of really situated talk and interaction, how that happens, you can see these subtle ways that point at how we collaborate, how we communicate, and how we're trying to establish mutual kind of understanding, establish common ground. And so I like working with data where you can see and start to trace how that's happening, how is that unfolding, and use that as a lens for understanding these complicated innate traits. And so, I think in terms of the innate traits, that there is a big degree of mystery, and so that my inclination is to look at observable, to see what you can empirically measure, and that sometimes that requires you to make limited metrics to try and understand it, and other times it means doing qualitative research to try and extract the kind of insights that give you an idea of what's happening. And they point towards, they reference they're a priori that there are these innate traits that are going on, but by focusing on these manifestations, it enables us to think in more concrete terms. But I think, as you say, that being the case, then it makes this ability to say whether or not machines are capable of having this innate thing when we don't know how or what it is in humans is very difficult. And I don't know, maybe, I guess that's, the neuroscientific perspectives and psychology perspectives that are trying to work out this kind of neurological elements, or, starts to move towards that, but it's clearly all very unknown. So on that basis, they can, I guess you could say, they have as much of a chance of having this innate ability. But for me, how I conceptualize of empathy is something that is fundamental about the interaction between humans, I guess. Sorry, that's probably a long-winded answer to that, but I would love to chat more about that because I think that's really interesting. Okay, so another question here about the differences between communication in human to human and human to robot. Do you find it likely that within the differences, there are also strengths to be found when human to robot communication is used for mental health support? And if so, do you know of an example? So yes, I think there is, this is where it gets quite interesting. So there's studies, for example, that have shown, I think it was war veterans were more willing to talk to a conversational agent they were about their post-traumatic stress disorder than they were to an actual therapist. So there are studies that show that people might be more willing to disclose. I think what's happening there really is the notion of self-presentation. So when we are communicating with other people, we put a lot of effort into how we appear. We take care to craft the words we say, to communicate the opinions, to try and express ourselves, who we are, but also our identity. And for many, it has been suggested that this is less of a concern when we're talking to something that we know not to be human, and we know that can't judge us and won't be engaging in that same sort of assessment process that we do as humans to understand and come to know each other. So there's things like that which I think obviously show real potential benefits, and particularly in mental health. I think the reason that this is garnering so much attention at the moment is that it's very well, people are well aware that there are limited resources and that there are lots of people experiencing distress. So if relatively simple interventions may provide some comfort, then is that a beneficial thing? And I would say yes, but I think it needs to be explored and tested, and also it probably needs to be I think part of it is how we talk about AI systems and position them, really. So, if we acknowledge that it's something, this is not replacing a therapist, this is not meant to be providing you the support that a doctor would, or a professional, or a trained professional, another human, but it might be able to do something. So it might be able to help guide you through in a slightly more interesting or interactive way through some activities that have been studied and shown to be helpful. Then that might be really useful. But I think there needs to be a lot more research into the differences between human interaction and human robot, human machine interaction, because There are things that at the minute are slightly inconsistent in the research. So, you know, some studies have really suggested that people are much more trusting of agents. So, there's some work by Elena Howard and colleagues which looked at emergency risk situations. And when they were told to evacuate and leave a building by a robot, they were likely to follow that, even if they thought that the robot was fallible and probably wrong. They still might defer to the judgment that the system will know best. There are other ones where we see people are very, very skeptical and quickly frustrated by and quite skeptical of machines, and not as willing to trust. And so thinking about the specific conversational contexts, like what is the scenario, how are the individuals positioned in relation to each other, you know, this can kind of have implications for this. Sorry, have we got another speaker question? Sorry, someone just, I'm not sure if someone wants to, okay, I'll wait a moment. There's another question in the chat. I just wasn't sure if maybe Frederick wanted to ask a question. And if people are able to unmute themselves, I realized. I'm not sure. If they're not, let me know and I can find a way to do that. Okay, so another question here. Interested in how this will affect communication, particularly in our children and the way they communicate with other children. So for instance, hey Siri, what's the time? Replaces, excuse me, could you please tell me the time? So these simple exchanges could be more impactful on society as the younger generations grow and develop their human-to-human relationships alongside these human-to-machine ones. So I think this is a really interesting consideration. And again, it's one that at the minute is relatively unclear. There's definitely a little bit more work emerging, starting to look specifically at interactions between children and these systems. It's not clear whether these aspects of impoliteness carry over currently. And there's a little bit of work that's started to look at this. I mean, interestingly, when there's one study that looks at it had an Alexa or like a smart speaker device that rebuked people if they weren't polite and asked them, would refuse to kind of carry out their requests unless they used please and thank you. And then people did sort of moderate and did it because it was necessary for the next step. But they weren't really behaving in ways that were truly polite. They would do the bare minimum to do it. But then in other examples, we see conversation where people are not in any way told to change the degree of politeness, etc. And yet they will say thank you at the end of the thing, thank you, goodbye, and they will use the kind of standard ways of greetings and kind of politeness protocols will infiltrate, even though it's not a thing. So it's unclear. But I think the key thing that you're saying is, yeah, people do talk to these systems differently currently. So the main thing is, yeah, they tend to be, we're more concise. And that's partly because the systems are not as capable at understanding. So people have responded. So there's kind of a feedback loop, right? In terms of how we communicate, how the machine is able to understand us, the degree to which it can. You know, when we realize that it can't, we then reformulate, we accommodate these shortcomings by adapting what we say, speaking in a more simplistic tone, repeating things. As they potentially become more sophisticated, that might be less necessary. But I think the thing that we do need to be thinking about is, because we don't know what the impact is. Language obviously has always sort of evolved and adapted in terms of use and is constantly changing. But this is obviously, if these become quite dominant communication partners over time, then thinking through how this impacts the broader kind of communicative patterns, whether there will be cross-pollination, whether certain things will stay or cross over, is something that I think is really interesting to look at. And it's challenging to look at. It's not easy to kind of work out these answers, but I think it's certainly something we need to be thinking about. Okay, so I think it's 1 o'clock, so it's time to wrap up. But thank you so much all for attending and your amazing questions.